Living without emotional negotiation changes everything, not because the world becomes easier, but because your internal position becomes clear. For a long time, you may have believed that connection requires compromise, that peace requires explanation, and that harmony requires emotional flexibility at any cost. But much of what people call connection is actually negotiation. A negotiation of tone, negotiation of boundaries, negotiation of identity. Emotional negotiation happens when your inner stability is exchanged for temporary relief, when you soften what you know to avoid discomfort, when you explain what does not need explanation, when you react not because you want to, but because silence feels unsafe. Living without emotional negotiation means those exchanges stop, not abruptly, not aggressively, but decisively. You stop bargaining with your internal state. You stop adjusting your clarity to match other people's expectations. You stop offering emotional access as a form of peacekeeping. This does not isolate you. It stabilizes you. Relationships begin to reorganize themselves around this change. Some grow quieter. Some become more distant. Some feel unfamiliar, not because something went wrong, but because the dynamic changed. When emotional negotiation ends, authenticity becomes unavoidable. People can no longer rely on your reactions to regulate themselves. They can no longer extract reassurance through pressure. They can no longer shape your behavior through urgency or guilt. This can feel uncomfortable at first, not because it is wrong, but because it is new. A mind that no longer negotiates emotionally does not need to prove itself. It does not need to win conversations. It does not need to manage perception constantly. It simply remains consistent, and consistency creates a new form of respect. Not admiration, not approval, but recognition. Recognition of limits, recognition of presence, recognition of stability. You begin to notice that many conflicts dissolve on their own, not because they were resolved, but because they were no longer fed. Emotional negotiation fuels cycles. When the fuel is removed, the cycle ends. Living this way does not make you rigid. It makes you selective. You still care. You still feel. You still connect. But connection, no longer costs you clarity. This is where internal authority fully integrates into daily life, not as a technique, not as a posture, but as a baseline. You no longer ask yourself how to respond in every situation. Your response is already aligned. This series was not about controlling others. It was not about detachment for its own sake. It was about reclaiming internal stability in a world that rewards emotional volatility. And this stability does not begin with grand decisions. It begins with quiet ones. The decision not to explain, the decision not to react, the decision not to negotiate your internal state. If you followed this series, you already understand something most people never articulate. That power does not come from intensity. It comes from consistency, and when consistency becomes natural, your life reorganizes itself around it. This concludes this chapter of Dark Mind Theory, but it does not end the conversation, because the mind does not stop forming after stability is reached. It begins much earlier, and that is where we go next.